They said the old janitor's cap didn't belong on a Navy base, not beside the shining boots and polished brass. One young officer scoffed, the sound sharp as a flag rope clinking in the wind, and the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Then the admiral stopped mid-stride, eyes fixed on the faded crest, the ghost of a squadron he'd once commanded. His salute, caught between silence and memory. Quiet men leave echoes too, and sometimes honor hides in ordinary cloth. The morning smelled of salt coffee and brass polish. Mess hall light slipped through the portholes, laying thin bars of gold across the tiled floor. The young sailors had just finished breakfast, restless, waiting for inspection. Their chatter bounced off the metal walls like gulls chasing scraps. One of them, Keller, barely 20, tipped his chair back and nodded toward the janitor near the far sink. "Hey, Chief," he called, half grinning. "That Cap Navy issue." 1972, sir. Laughter rolled through the room. Another sailor added, "Careful, that thing might have seen more action than our ship." Hal Marin didn't turn. He wrung out the mop, set it down again, and worked the handle in steady strokes, precise, practiced, like muscle memory that refused to retire. Silent beat. He paused beneath the hanging flag, the red-white shimmer reflecting in the wash bucket. His jaw moved once, then stilled. Big Walt, the mess hall cook, leaned from the serving line. "Kid," he said, voice rumbling warm, "that mop's seen more action than you." The room cracked again, but softer this time, the laughter shifting into something almost respectful. Hal finished the aisle, straightened, and tapped his cap into shape. The stitching on the brim was frayed where an insignia used to be. No one noticed that a faint outline of wings still lingered there, dulled by years of cleaning solvent. Across the hall, a clipboard clicked. Lieutenant Reddick's voice barked orders about polish and formation, but his tone thinned when he saw the janitor still mopping after reveille. "You there? What's the rush? Inspections for uniforms, not tiles." Hal looked up briefly. "A clean deck keeps everyone upright, sir." "Guess so," Reddick muttered. "Just don't scuff the shine." "I rest marker." But Hal didn't reply. He folded the rag, lined it square on the bucket rim, and pushed the cart toward the supply closet. The sailors watched him go. Keller whispered, "Think he even heard us?" "He heard," said another. "He just doesn't care." Still their eyes followed the small figure in gray coveralls as he passed the framed photographs of crews long gone. Each picture caught a flicker of him reflected in the glass, a ghost stitched between generations. Outside the mess hall, gulls screamed over the pier, and the wind carried a faint radio tune, something from before their parents were born. Hal stopped for a heartbeat, the melody brushing through memory. Then he moved on. The morning orders hummed through the corridor like a metronome clipboard taps boots in rhythm. Hal Marin kept to the far end of the mess, rinsing the mop head under the spout. The water ran brown, then clear, leaving a ring like a metal's shadow in the sink. Lieutenant Reddick strode in cap, crisp eyes quick. "Janitor," he said, "you missed a section by the door." Hal nodded, moved there, and wrung the mop again. The gesture was slow, practiced, each twist deliberate, as if counting time itself. "You were Navy once, weren't you?" Reddick asked. Chief Petty Hal answered short, not proud. "Then you know chain of command. This base runs on efficiency, not nostalgia." Hal's gaze stayed on the floor. "Efficiency doesn't polish character, sir. Just metal." Reddick frowned. The sound of dripping coffee filled the pause, each drop clicking like a clock hand. Coffee drip, boot shuffle. Somewhere a radio crackled with news about the parade schedule. What did you say? The lieutenant asked. Hal straightened his mop, balanced like a staff. I said, some ranks don't wash off. The room seemed to still. The air between them tightened. That a joke? Chief Reddick's voice sharpened. No joke, sir. Just a truth. Reddick folded his arms. His eyes narrowed not in anger but in confusion, as if unsure whether he'd been challenged or taught. Well, keep your truth quiet next inspection. Still, he didn't look up. He folded the cap, lining its edges with a care that made the younger men hesitate to speak again. Big Walt passed with a tray of coffee mugs. Refill, Hal. Thanks, Walt. Just one. He gives you grief again. Regulations have to pin someone. Pinned by protocol, not by rank. Walt chuckled low. Guess paperwork's got more muscle than we ever did. Hal smiled thinly, lifting his cup in a silent toast to nothing particular. The steam rose between them, curling like memory. Outside, the young sailors waited to collect their duties. Keller spotted Hal through the door glass. Think the old man heard Reddick snap at him. He hears everything. Another said he just filters the noise. Their voices faded as Hal stepped into the corridor. A single patch of sun from a skylight fell across his cap, lighting the faint stitch of a wing. He stopped there a moment, the beam haloing dust around him. Then he moved on, pushing the mop bucket like a silent companion. Reddick watched from his office door, expression unreadable. He whispered to himself, some ranks don't wash off. What did he mean by that? Hal paused by the hall mirror. The reflection showed a man in gray coveralls and a shadow of a uniform beneath. He nodded once to his own ghost and kept walking. Pull quotes. Some ranks don't wash off. Pinned by protocol, not by rank. The air at the naval base thickened with polish and anticipation. It was inspection morning, and every corridor gleamed like a mirror trying to impress the sun. The young cadets moved in lines, voices low shoes, echoing in rhythm with their nerves. Somewhere beyond the open mess hall window, a seagull cried, stretching the silence between orders. Hal Marin was there before dawn as usual, mopping the last stretch by the honor wall. His motions had the patience of tides, forward turn, squeeze, return. Each sweep felt like an act of memory, as though the floor had to be clean enough for ghosts to walk through. The cap rested on the cart beside the bucket edges, smoothed color faded to a quiet gray blue that still whispered of rank and history. Big Walt leaned out from the kitchen doorway. They've got the admiral coming in today, he said. Whole place smells like nerves. Hal looked up calm. Smells like polish and coffee to me. Walt laughed, then lowered his voice. You're not nervous. Retirement's permanent, Walt. You can't get demoted twice. That earned a low chuckle before Walt disappeared back to his pans. Across the room, Commander Lillian Hart, Base Operations Officer, paced with her clipboard. She was efficient, respected, one of the few who still said please when she gave an order. She noticed Hal's steady movement by the wall and stopped beside him. Chief Marin, she said softly, I keep seeing you work this same spot. What's here? Hal looked at the tiles, their surface catching faint reflections of the flag. Just scuffs, ma'am. Old ones take longer to fade. Her eyes followed his hand as he lifted the cap from the cart, wiping a fine dust ring off the brim. Under the light, a pattern surfaced, a small embroidered crest, almost gone, its silver thread dulled but intact. That's not standard issue, Hart said. No, ma'am. Not anymore. He turned the cap slowly, as if checking whether the past still breathed beneath the stitching. Used to belong to someone from Squadron 11. She looked closer, brow tightening. That squadron was disbanded in '89. You served there. Hal didn't answer immediately. The seagull outside cried again, its echo falling through the hall like a reminder. Long time ago, he said finally. Long enough that it doesn't matter. Everything matters in uniform, she replied, not unkindly. The young cadets nearby were still aligning chairs, whispering about medals and straightening their caps, oblivious to the quiet conversation happening behind them. Hal brushed the cap with his thumb, watching the dust drift away, revealing the faint outline of wings and an anchor crossed by light. It looked almost like the ghost of duty itself. Hart's voice softened. That insignia wasn't that the admiral's old command. Hal's hand stopped mid-motion. Maybe he said. Hard to tell under the dust. You kept it clean all these years, she said. You could have left it behind. Some things don't stay behind, Commander. They stay attached. Hart studied him a moment longer, the kind of silence that weighs more than words. Then she nodded. Carry on, Chief. As she walked off, Hal folded the cap carefully and placed it back on the cart. His reflection in the bucket, rippled gray uniform melting into a younger man's shape for half a second before fading. He breathed once deep and even, and the faint scent of brass polish mingled with salt air through the open window. Outside, Keller and the other cadets stood in formation, muttering about whether the admiral would actually show. You think he'll notice if our shoes aren't perfect, one asked. He'll notice everything, another said. Admirals always do. Keller smirked, half anxious. Maybe he'll salute the janitor for once. The others laughed, but it came out thin, uncertain. Hal passed them without a glance, pushing his mop bucket toward storage. The sound of wheels on tile filled the space between their jokes. He paused by the door, watching their reflections shimmer on the floor he'd just polished. The room looked brighter now, as if it had remembered itself. The moment held a quiet weight, nothing dramatic, just a calm before something inevitable. The seagull's cry came again, cutting through the distance, sharper this time. Then the rumble of an engine joined it. Tires on gravel, a car door shutting, voices outside shifting to formality. The laughter died in the hall. Walt poked his head out, whispering, "That'll be him." Hart's voice carried from the corridor. "Admiral on deck." Every cadet straightened in an instant, their movements snapping into discipline. Hal stood very still, eyes on the dust motes, drifting near the cap, which now caught a beam of light through the window. The old crest shimmered faintly, half-buried but undeniable, waiting. Outside, footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, echoing like judgment down the polished hall. The seagull cried once more, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The corridor gleamed like glass as the admiral stepped inside. Every sound, the tap of his cane, the rustle of uniforms, seemed to echo off the walls in perfect order. Behind him trailed Commander Hart, clipboard tucked to her chest, while the cadets lined up so straight their shadows looked rehearsed. Hal Marin stood near the honor wall, mop set aside, cap resting on the cart. He didn't move when the room snapped to attention. He simply stood there, posture quiet but steady, eyes on the floor he had just finished polishing. The smell of polish and coffee drifted between silence and ceremony. The admiral's gaze passed over the cadets one by one, sharp, practiced, unblinking. Then, as he turned toward the far end of the hall, his eyes stopped. His breath hitched almost imperceptibly. The cap. He stepped closer, cane tapping once, twice. "Where did you get that?" Hart blinked, caught off guard. "Sir." "The cap on that cart," the admiral said, voice softer now. "That crest, it's from Squadron 11. Hal looked up at last, calm, unmoving. "Yes, sir." The admiral reached out a gloved hand, but stopped short of touching it. "This insignia was retired 30 years ago." Hal nodded. "So was I." The admiral's jaw tightened. "You served there?" Hal hesitated, not from fear, but from memory. "Maintenance Chief, USS Halcyon. We carried your command patch, sir." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The flags along the corridor fluttered faintly from the air vent's sigh. The admiral finally exhaled. "You kept it." "Not to show off," Hal said, "just to remember." A young cadet shifted in line, whispering before catching himself. The sound was swallowed by the stillness that spread like a slow tide. The admiral turned his head slightly, eyes tracing the silver threads, dulled but unmistakable. The room, bright a moment ago, seemed to dim around the two men. Hart lowered her clipboard, watching the unspoken recognition unfold. "Sir," she said gently, "Chief Marin's been with facilities for 12 years. Never missed a day." The admiral didn't answer her. His voice, when it came, was quieter than the rustle of the flag. "I remember the night we lost half the deck crew. That insignia came off one of their caps." He paused, swallowing. "I thought it was gone." Hal's eyes softened. "Things have a way of finding their way back, sir. Even through dust." For a moment the admiral's hand hovered near his brow as if to salute, but it stopped mid-air. The silence that followed grew deep enough to feel. The cadets, uncertain, waited for an order. None came. The admiral's lips parted slightly, but no words emerged. The old man who had weathered storms and wars now stood motionless before a janitor's cart. He was pinned by protocol, not by rank. The line between command and respect blurred, invisible but immense. A flag fluttered behind them, light catching the red and white, as if the air itself wished to bow. Hal reached for the cap, brushing a thin layer of dust from its brim. "Permission to continue cleaning, sir." The admiral's eyes flickered, the faintest ghost of a smile breaking the stiffness of his face. "Permission granted." "Chief." The title hung there like a bell note, deep and resonant. The cadets exchanged glances but said nothing. Hart lowered her eyes, understanding what had passed. Silence can be the loudest salute. The admiral turned away slowly, leaving the hall with his cane tapping softer now, almost reverent. The flag above them lifted once more in the breeze, and for a heartbeat, the sunlight glinted across the cap's insignia, bright as honor remembered. Morning settled over the base with a gentler rhythm. The sharp cadence of orders had softened into the hush that follows revelation. Sunlight slanted through the long windows, streaking across the tiled corridor that gleamed brighter than it had in years. The cadets stood in a loose half-circle around the honor wall. Buckets and cloths had replaced rifles and drills. Polished tins replaced inspection sheets. No one had been told to do it. It simply happened. One began to clean, and the rest followed. Hal Marin was there, quiet as ever, guiding their hands without rank or rule. He didn't command. He demonstrated. He showed Keller how to fold the rag to catch the edges of the frame. He knelt beside another cadet, showing where the brass letters dulled fastest near the corners. The boy nodded, eyes wide, almost reverent. "You've done this before, sir?" the cadet asked. "More times than I can count," Hal said with a half-smile. "Dust has a longer service record than any of us." A ripple of soft laughter spread through the group, cautious at first, then warmer. The sound felt different now, less mocking, more like belonging. Keller rubbed at a tarnished plaque until his own reflection surfaced in the metal. "Can't believe I used to laugh at that cap," he murmured. Hal didn't look up. "That's all right. Laughter's just ignorance trying to breathe." Hart appeared at the end of the hall, clipboard gone, for once a mug of coffee in her hand. She watched them work for a moment before speaking. "I didn't assign this detail," she said quietly. "You don't have to," Hal replied. "Respect's self-cleaning when you give it a little time." She smiled, taking a sip. "You know, Chief, the floor's finally saluting back." That earned a chuckle from Walt, who had rolled in a trolley of fresh cloths. "Don't give it ideas, Commander. We'll end up polishing till sundown." Hal straightened, stretching his back, the mop handle resting like an old flagstaff at his side. "Wouldn't be the worst way to end a day," he said. The others nodded. The air smelled faintly of wax and coffee, and sunlight flickered on the wet floor in tiny bursts like applause made of light. For a moment, nobody spoke. It wasn't the silence of duty or order, it was a quieter kind, shared and equal. The sound of the mop against tile became its own music, steady and calm. Outside, the seagulls wheeled and cried above the docks, their voices distant but clear. The admiral's car was gone, but his presence lingered in the way the cadets moved straighter backs, slower speech, small gestures done with care. Hart approached Hal again. "He didn't say much after you left, you know," she said. Hal smiled faintly. "He didn't need to. He asked for your name for the record." "That's generous. Records don't usually bother with janitors. Maybe they should start." The conversation drifted into a comfortable quiet. Through the high windows, a flag rippled its reflection, landing across the polished wall, merging with the mirrored brass names. The cadets noticed and stood back instinctively, letting the light flash over the letters. Hal reached for his old cap, brushing the brim once more. "Funny thing about polish," he said, voice low. "You never see it working, but one day you notice what it's made visible." Keller turned toward him, eyes bright. "Sir, you think the admiral meant to salute you yesterday?" Hal shook his head. "No. He saluted what was left of all of us." The group fell silent again, a collective pause, neither solemn nor sad. Just full. The kind of silence that holds weight without words. The air shimmered faintly with warmth, and the faint hum of lights. Then, almost by accident, Keller stepped back and caught sight of their reflections stretching down the corridor. "Look at that," he whispered. "We're part of it now." Hal smiled. "That's the trick of honor. It's contagious when it's clean." They worked another hour, maybe 2 time lost between laughter cloth and memory. When the last plaque caught the sunlight and the brass shone pure, Hal put the mop away. The cadets lingered, reluctant to leave. Hart's voice broke the quiet one last time. "Chief Marin," she said, "the admiral left this." She held out a sealed envelope with no insignia, only Hal's name written in tight blue ink. He didn't open it, not yet. "Tell him thank you." She nodded. "He already knows." Hal turned back to the wall, the reflection of the flag still waving gently across the polished names. For a long breath he stood there, neither veteran nor janitor, just a man at peace with a floor that finally seemed to shine on its own. Silent beat, the light shifted. Hart caught Hal's eye. They shared a brief nod. Nothing more was needed. Pull quote, "Sometimes respect arrives without drums or orders." A week later, the corridor didn't smell of polish anymore. It smelled of quiet pride, coffee varnish, and a trace of salt drifting in through the open window. The honor wall had gained a new glass case between the old plaques. Inside, resting on a dark blue cloth, was Hal Marin's cap. The faint silver insignia shimmered under the morning light, no longer a secret, no longer buried beneath dust. The brass plate beneath it read simply, "Chief Petty Officer Hal Marin, service never ends." Cadets passed slower there now, some out of respect, some out of curiosity. They didn't speak loudly anymore when they crossed that hall. Keller stood in front of the case, still holding the rag he used to polish the brass. His reflection hovered beside Hal's name. "Didn't think I'd miss the old man," he said. "He's not gone," Walt replied from the doorway. "He just changed departments." Keller smiled faintly. "Maintenance upstairs, huh?" "Maybe," Walt said, shrugging. The kind of job where the floors stay clean for good. Commander Hart entered with a clipboard, the same one she'd carried since the inspection, but today it held a single page, the new guest board. She tacked it to the wall beneath the case. Everyone who served with him or learned from him can sign, she said. Tradition's just memory written down. The first to write his name was Keller. He hesitated, then added a short note beside it. Thanks for teaching us how to stand tall. One by one, others followed, ink spreading like ripples from a dropped stone. Hart stepped back and read the board quietly. It's funny, she said, he never asked for recognition. Walt nodded. Didn't have to. He made the place remember on its own. From the window, the sound of waves reached, faintly brushing the silence like a hand smoothing cloth. Somewhere a distant radio played an old ballad, something from the 60s, soft and steady. Its words blurred into static, then faded completely. Hal wasn't there to see it, but somehow his presence lingered in the space between breaths. The corridor seemed to hold its own composure, polished and calm, as though still under his watch. Hart adjusted the light above the display. The beam caught the cap's insignia, sending a thin glint across the wall. You know, she said softly, I never heard him raise his voice. Keller looked up. Guess he didn't have to. Her smile was slow, reflective. Right. He never raised his voice, only his standard. The line settled over them like a benediction, simple and true. The cadets nearby paused, letting it sink in, as if each word had weight. For a long while, no one moved. The light above flickered once, then steadied. The flag outside caught a passing breeze, its reflection waving gently across the glass case. The moment felt final, but not sad. Legacy wasn't an ending. It was a continuation written in small gestures, the polished floor, the quiet hallway, the respectful pause before a name. Keller stepped back to look one last time. He'd probably tell us to stop standing around, he said. Hart laughed softly. Then let's make sure he'd approve of the shine. They left the corridor together, their footsteps fading into the hum of the building. The camera of memory stayed behind, fixed on the glass case, and the faint reflection of the flag glinting across the cap, silent beat, the sound of waves beyond the wall, the last echo of a radio fading into static. Replay trigger. He never raised his voice, only his standard. The hallway stayed bright long after the day's orders, faded sunlight glinting off the glass case where his old cap rested like a kept promise. Outside, the gulls cried over the pier, and the flag hummed against its pole, small sounds that felt like breath. The cadets still stopped there sometimes, fingers tracing their own names on the guest board beneath his leaving smudges of polish and ink. It looked in that light like the floor itself was remembering him. Still, kindness worked the way wax did, quietly, layer on layer, until what was dull began to shine. His cap under glass was no relic, just a mirror for every quiet act that followed.